Since his debut in 1962, Spider-Man has been one of the most popular superheroes in the world, and he's also one of the most well-known. But with countless Spider-Man stories built around some pretty confusing plot points, it's easy to get mixed up. Let us have the great responsibility of clearing up a lot of incorrect things people believe about Spider-Man. Of all the original Marvel Universe titles, The Amazing Spider-Man is one of the most strongly identified with Stan the Man Lee, even though he'd be a part of all of Marvel's early string of hits, including the Avengers, the X-Men, the Hulk, and more. Spidey was the character he stuck with the longest, scripting the first 100 issues and then staying on sporadically for another few years after.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.
If, however, you think Stan's the only one responsible for the thrills of those early adventures, you're mistaken. Most fans are aware that Lee pioneered the Marvel style of writing, in which he'd collaborate with an artist on a loose plot, then add in the dialogue after everything else was done. What's a little less well known, however, is that his relationship with artist and Spider-Man's co-creator Steve Ditko was one of the first to deteriorate. According to Marvel Comics' The Untold Story, the latter chunk of Ditko's 38-issue run, including the legendary story that gave the world the iconic image of Spider-Man fighting his way out from under a massive heap of rubble, was produced without Ditko and Lee speaking to each other at all. Of course, that doesn't mean Lee wasn't a necessary ingredient for Spider-Man's early success. The fact that he stayed with the character for almost 7 years after Ditko's departure and kept on producing some of the best years of Spider-Man is a testament to how important he was to the character, and how well he got along with Ditko's replacement, Jazzy John Romita. The one thing about Spider-Man that's always been true is that underneath that mask, it's always Peter Parker. Just an average, everyday scientific super genius with problems just like ours. You know, like juggling our long-term relationships to supermodels while making a living off selfies. That's why it's always been Peter, except for all those times it's someone else. While Peter Parker has certainly been the main man in the mask as Spider-Man since Spidey's debut in 1962, he's definitely not the only one. For a while in the 90s, Spider-Man was instead Ben Reilly, a clone of Peter made by a villain called the Jackal. Right around the time Peter temporarily lost his powers, Reilly was tricked into thinking he was the genuine article. He dyed his hair blonde, got a job at a coffee shop, and took over the role with a new costume for the entirety of 1996 before eventually dissolving into a pile of dust. More recently, Peter found his own consciousness overwritten by Dr. Octopus, who took over his life as the superior Spider-Man, beyond just variations on Peter Parker's body, and enough alternate universe versions that they have their own special team. There's an entirely different Spider-Man in the Marvel Universe, Miles Morales, who stepped into the spotlight in 2018's Into the Spider-Verse, a movie based entirely on teaching us that anyone could be Spider-Man if they never give up, including Gwen Stacy, Nick Cage, and a talking pig.
It can get weirder.
One of the most intense arguments you could overhear in a comic book store back when the first Spider-Man movie came out concerned whether Spider-Man's web shooters were mechanical or an organic byproduct of his spider powers. Going by the comics, though, it doesn't matter what side of the argument you're on, you're wrong either way. When Sam Raimi's film hit theaters, one of the few notable changes that it made to Spider-Man's origin story came with the addition of organic web shooters. This proved to be so controversial that when the next movies were announced in 2010, the decision to use the comic's mechanical web shooters literally made headlines. After all, he'd never had organic web shooters in the comics, or at least he didn't have them in the comics before those movies came out. After their success, a 2005 storyline called The Other ended with Peter being eaten by a giant spider and emerging with organic webs. Those didn't last either. They inexplicably disappeared with the back-to-basics approach of the Brand New Day story 2 years later, but other Marvel Universe spider characters retained them. In fact, Cindy Moon, a classmate of Peter's who was bitten by the same radioactive spider, is so capable of spinning her own webs that her superheroic codename became Silk. One of the defining tragedies of Spider-Man's life was the death of Gwen Stacy. In the 60s, she was the love of Peter Parker's life, forming a complicated love triangle with Mary Jane Watson and providing the backbone of the soap opera that underscored his Spidey superheroics. In Amazing Spider-Man number 121, the Green Goblin kidnapped her and used her as bait to lure Spider-Man into a battle at the top of the George Washington Bridge. And while the story title wasn't revealed until the last page, the night Gwen Stacy died lived up to its name. The Goblin is definitely to blame for Gwen's murder. He's the one who took her to the top of the bridge and the one who threw her off, all in an effort to torture Spider-Man. If, however, you really want to get technical about things, he's not the one responsible for what literally killed her. That sad honor goes to Spider-Man himself. It's easy to miss, but the real tragedy can be seen in the issue. When Spider-Man tried to save Gwen by snagging her leg with a web line as she plunged toward the Hudson River, the sudden stop proved to be the fatal moment. A small snap sound effect next to Gwen shows it was a broken neck from Peter's attempt at saving her that actually ended Gwen's life. Spider-Man doesn't kill. It's one of the absolute rules of the character, and unlike other heroes, he's lived up to it too. In over 50 years of comics, Spider-Man has never actually killed anyone himself, except for the one time he did. It happened in the pages of Spider-Man vs. Wolverine, a 1987 one-shot by Christopher Priest and Mark Bright that pulled Spidey into a dark world of international espionage. The conflict between the two title characters is largely built around a spy codenamed Charlemagne, who is described as Wolverine's best friend from his days as a government operative. In this story, Charlie wants Wolverine to kill her so she won't be apprehended and spend the rest of her life being tortured in a gulag. When Spider-Man stumbles into this situation, all he knows is Wolverine is trying to kill someone. In the fight that ensues, Spidey unleashes his full strength on the X-Man, hitting him with blows that would wreck cars. Sadly, Charlie takes advantage of the brutal conflict, tricking Spider-Man into hitting her instead of Wolverine, using him to commit suicide. Peter was understandably traumatized by the event, and while he and Wolverine have made peace in the years since, it was a source of bitterness between them for a long time. The iconic image of Peter Parker is of a young man struggling to make ends meet by working as a freelance photographer, selling snapshots of his own superheroic exploits to the Daily Bugle to satisfy J. Jonah Jameson's demand for pictures of Spider-Man. If that's your only concept of what Spidey does when he's not out fighting crime, however, it's time for an update. The truth is, while Peter worked for the Bugle for decades in a lot of classic stories, he hasn't actually been a freelance photographer for most of this century. Starting in 2001, Pete returned to his old stomping grounds of Midtown High as a science teacher, but that proved to be a pretty short-lived career choice. In the years since, he's had a couple of science-related jobs working for a think tank called Horizon Labs, where he reverse-engineered his crime-fighting gadgets into consumer goods. He even founded his own multinational corporation called Parker Industries, although technically it was Otto Octavius who founded that company while he was in Peter's body, and Peter had to destroy it to keep it from being taken over by Nazis. Comics are complicated. One of the more controversial moments in Spider-Man's comics history involved a deal with the devil, like the literal devil, not just this guy.
Finish it!
After Peter revealed his identity during the events of Civil War, his family was targeted by bad guys who nearly killed Aunt May, which was a good reminder of why he had the whole secret identity thing to begin with. Unfortunately for the Parker family, that sort of reveal isn't the kind of thing you can undo, unless you're willing to make an infernal bargain with Mephisto, which is exactly what happened. Rather than selling their souls, however, Peter and then-wife Mary Jane Watson sold their marriage, effectively erasing their years of wedded bliss from Marvel Comics continuity as though it had never happened. In the Spider-Man comics, Peter and MJ were both freed up to pursue new relationships, but don't let that fool you into thinking the marriage is completely gone. In order to go along with the comic book storyline, the Spider-Man newspaper strip did away with the marriage as well. Readers reacted so poorly, however, that in the strip that ran on May 24, 2009, the elimination of the marriage was revealed to have been a dream. Ever since, newspaper Spidey has remained happily married, or at least as happy as anyone can be when they spend most of their time getting knocked unconscious right next to Dilbert. Everyone knows that Peter Parker was orphaned at a young age and raised by Aunt May and Uncle Ben. Considering that his surrogate parents were about as wholesome and salt of the earth as people could be, it stands to reason that Richard and Mary Parker were cut from the same cloth. Just average ordinary folks, right? Wrong. In 1968, it was revealed that when the Parker parents died, they were under a cloud of suspicion as traitors to their country. The truth, however, was that they were spies working for S.H.I.E.L.D., who had infiltrated the Red Skull's criminal organization before being killed, without ever getting the chance to clear their names. Yes, in case you missed that, Spider-Man's parents were spies who were murdered by Captain America's arch-nemesis. If that's not weird enough, they later turned up alive, only to be revealed even later to be robot duplicates. That's not the end of the Parker Parker family's secrets, though. It turns out that in addition to the parents he never knew, Spidey also had a long-lost older sister, Teresa, who was herself a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. After a team-up in which it was revealed that her memories of the Parkers were falsely implanted by Mephisto, it turned out that was also a ruse. She was in fact Peter's actual sister after all, and even pitched in to help him fight bad guys using her spy skills. If you've ever read any Spider-Man comic, or seen him in a movie or a cartoon, or encountered the character pretty much anywhere, then you've almost certainly seen the motto that guides his life.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Except Ben Parker never actually said those words. In Amazing Fantasy number 15, Spidey's often referenced motto is never spoken out loud by any character, not even Uncle Ben. Instead, it only appears in a caption at the end of the story as a moral lesson imparted by, well, Stan Lee. Spidey himself doesn't even say it until 25 years later in 1987. As time went on, though, the phrase became more and more identified with Ben, largely because it would be really weird for Spider-Man to solemnly vow to accept the lesson that was imparted to him through narration by the guy who wrote his comics. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.